G'day, Michael from ironbarkgamesstudio, and welcome to the 16th and final part of this tutorial series, which will involve setting up a Blender scene to render the character. This is going to be a hero shot of the character, and it's always nice to have a final image of your work which you can show off to people, or perhaps there are UI elements in your game that require renders of the character. Jumping into Blender, we are going to start with a fresh scene. So with the objects in the scene, I'm going to press A, X, and delete them. I'm then going to click on File and Append. I'm going to search where I've got my Blender file saved with the character on it. So that's this one here. And this is actually going to open up the Blender file, and we can see all of the different components of the Blender file which we can import into this fresh scene. The object folder is always a good one to look into, so they're all the objects which we have in that scene that we saved previously. But we did organize them into collections. So I'm going to open up the collection folder, and I'm going to select the meshes and also the controllers folder. So that's what I want to copy across into this new file. So with those two collections selected, I'm going to click on Append. And there we go, we have our character in our new Blender scene. So this is how you can copy across characters or any objects from other Blender files. Again, we don't actually need the controllers shown, so I'm just going to hide those. There's one more thing I want to import into the scene, and that is a weapon for our character to hold. So this is entirely optional. I'm going to go to File, Append again. Go to where I've got my Blender file saved with the weapon, open that up, and go to the object, and select the object, and then click Append. And now I have a weapon for my character to hold in the render. So I want to create a pose for my character for the final render. So I'm going to go to the Animation tab here. I'm going to select the rig, Control Tab, and just select it, change my dope sheet to the action editor, unlink the walk there. Can then go Alt R, Alt G to reset my character's rotation and location. Then going to go back to my layout tab, and I want to put the weapon in the character's hand. So let's move this up here, grab Z, grab it on the X, we'll rotate it on Z by 180, and rotate it on the X by 90. Go into top view with 7, sort of vaguely line it up here. Go to front view and move down. Rotate it a little bit, something like that. And we want to duplicate this and put one in the other hand as well. So Shift D, move it on the X. Just rotate it around like that. And line it up. Like so. And now we want to parent the weapon to the hand so that when the hand control is moved, it's also going to follow. So select the weapon first, and then Shift select the rig, go into pose mode, so Control Tab, select just the hand controller here, and then go Control P and choose bone. So we're setting the parent to the bone that we've got selected. So now if we rotate this bone, it's also going to rotate the gun. We'll do the same with the other side, so Control Tab to get out of pose mode, select the gun, select the hand control, select the rig, Control Tab, select the hand controller, Control P, and then set parent to bone. So it rotates around with the hand. And now we've got to get our character into some sort of cool pose. So we'll go for a pose like that. And to save this pose, so say we do some other animations or something, or we want another pose, we can sort of lock this one in if we go to our animation tab, select our keyframes, we'll select our rig, and then go new, and we'll call this action render pose, and we'll save this as and we'll just fake the user there. Select all of our keyframes, press I, and then we'll go location and rotation. So we've keyframed it in there. So that means if we go to one of our other animations, and it looks like I've already lost one of the idols, go to this idle here, go to the idle, we go back to our render pose, we've got our render pose in there. Head back into the layout, and we can move on to the next step, which is going to be lighting. So we're going to do a pretty traditional 3-point lighting sort of setup stage. We're going to have a key light, which will act as the main light source on one side of the character. We've got a fill light, we'll add additional light to the other side of the character. Then we'll have a rim light, which will be placed behind the character, and it's going to illuminate the edges. So we're going to switch the viewport from solid to viewport shading rendered. And everything's going to appear quite dark, as the only lighting we have is a little bit of ambient light. Currently, we're viewing the scene using the Eevee rendering engine, so this is a real-time renderer, and is a good start to see how things are looking. However, we can switch this over to cycles later, which will generally give us better results. So to add a light, let's go Shift A, we'll go light, and we'll just add a point light. And we're going to move this out a little bit, and up, and across to one side of the character there. And we want to increase the intensity of the light, so we'll go to the light settings or the object data properties. And let's increase the wattage. Let's go about 160. And we can increase or decrease the radius to adjust the softness of shadows. So let's go 0.6 to have softer shadows there. And I'm going to bring this out and a bit more to the side there, and maybe a little bit up. So this is going to be our key light. I'm going to duplicate the key light, move it across on the X, and I'm going to call this one fill light. And for the fill light, I'm going to lower the power. Let's go about 70. And we'll increase the radius to about 1. And we're going to bring this out a fair bit further. We'll go with something like that. Let's now grab our fill light here, Shift D. We're going to move it behind the character, so I'm going to go Shift Z. Move it about there. We're going to set the power to something quite high. Let's go about 600. And the radius, we're going to make this even larger, about 2.5. So this is going to be our rim lighting. The next thing we're going to need is a camera to actually render the scene. So let's go Shift A and add a camera there. Press Alt R to reset the rotation. RX 90. Let's just move it out on the Y, move it up on the Z a little bit. If you press numpad 0, you can look through the camera and position it whilst looking through it. So you press G to grab, to move the camera. You can hold down Shift to move it in smaller increments. You can also press G and double tap Z to move it backwards. So maybe let's frame it from the sort of waist up. And also notice we have a little capsule here that we don't need, so I'm going to just hide that. Whilst we're at it, if you notice next to the little hide icon, we also have a camera icon, and if you disable the camera icon, that means it's not going to get rendered. So our little capsule duplicate isn't going to be seen, and it's not going to be rendered. If we want to, we probably just delete it though. Okay, I'm happy with that camera framing. I'm going to just middle mouse click and rotate out of that. Then I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to go empty and add a plane axis. And this is going to represent the focal point for the camera. So I'm going to grab this plane axis, and I'm going to move it up to around where the head is. So I want the head to be the focal point of the camera, or the focus of the camera. And we're going to rename this object to DOF for depth of field. And I should probably also rename my fill light duplicate out back to rim light. So I'm going to select the camera, going to make sure I'm on the object data properties. And we have a depth of field here, so I'm just going to turn that on. And then with the little eyedropper tool, I'm going to select the DOF, the depth of field marker. So if we look through the camera and we move this focal point back and forth, we should see this affect the render. So I'm just going to press G, move it back on the Y. You can see that it becomes unfocused and blurry. If we move this forward, it'll become more in focus. And if we move it too far forward, it'll become blurry again. So this is really handy to add a focal point for the character. If we select the camera, we do have an f-stop, and that's going to adjust the amount of blur from the focal point. So we might just want to move this down a little bit to about 1.4. And so we get a little bit of blur in the weapon, the gun at the front, but the head's going to remain in focus. So this is going to be the focal point. Now it's time to switch our rendering engine over to cycles and adjust some of these settings. So up here with the camera, the render properties, I'm going to change the render engine from Eevee, which is our real-time renderer, to cycles. And the longer you wait, the crisper this is going to become. If you move the camera around, it's going to become a little bit blurry, and then it's going to increase the samples, which is essentially the quality of the render. So we can view it in real time, but it's going to be a lot slower than viewing it in Eevee. Just to make sure this is going to go as quickly as possible when we render it, go into your Edit and Preferences. Take a look in System, and under CUDA, you should see your graphics card in here. Just make sure that you've got your graphics card ticked on, and that means we can use the graphics card for rendering, which is much faster than using the CPU. So we'll just close that. And then back in our render settings, we'll change the device from CPU and GPU compute. And as we can see in the preview already, that goes a lot quicker. I'm then going to scroll down here in the settings, and I'm going to go to Film. And I'm just going to tick on Transparent. So this is going to render a transparent background. So if we save this as a PNG, we've got a transparent background which we can use to add in something a bit later on. So we don't have to have render a background inside of Blender, or we're not just going to get a grey background if we leave it as the default. Scrolling down a little bit further, under Color Management, I'm going to look at the look settings, and we can adjust this here. I'm going to go for a medium high contrast. I think that looks a little bit sort of nicer than the default. You could push this a little bit more with like the high contrast or the very high contrast, but I think that might look a little bit too harsh. So I'm just going to go medium high. Scrolling back up to the render properties, we have a noise threshold. So this is going to be how crisp or clear the image is going to look. So we can see that in the viewport, we have a noise threshold of 0.1, and in the render, we have a noise threshold of 0.01. So that means the render is going to be of a much higher quality than what we're seeing in the viewport here, because as you can see, there is still a fair bit of grain within the render there. I'm going to bump this up a little bit to 0.05, and the higher you have this, the quicker the render is going to be. So this is just going to save us a little bit of time when rendering. We can always lower this to a lower noise threshold. When we want our final render, we're happy with everything and we want the best result. With that, I'm going to press F12 to render the frame. Up here we have a time that's elapsed rendering it, we have a time remaining, and this is our current render. So from here we might want to make some adjustments with our lighting and setting up the scene. So I think I want to pull the key light back a little bit further. I think the rim's just a little bit too bright, and maybe move the fill light away a little bit more, maybe get a bit more of a shadow in there as well. So let's make some adjustments. Okay, I've just messed around a little bit with my lights, getting a little bit of a nicer look, so I want a bit of a glint in the visor there. And we'll give it another render, so F12. So now we can get into the process of compositing. We're not going to be doing too much compositing, just a little bit to change the color and add a little bit of a glow sort of effect around shiny areas. So I'm going to close this render, and I'm going to go to the compositing tab. I'm going to make sure that Use Nose use nodes is clicked on. So on the left we have our render layer, so this is the render we created, and on the right we have our composite, which is the final output. If we go Shift A and search for a viewer node, add that in, and then link up the image to the image there, we get our image in the background. So you can press V to zoom out the image in the background, you can press Alt V to zoom in, or we can use Alt middle mouse button to move the image from side to side. So we just got a nice little preview in the background there. Just going to move this out of the way for now, and I'm going to go Shift A, and I'm going to search for an RGB curves. Add that in there. I'm going to Shift A, and I'm going to search for a blur node. I'm going to press Shift A and search for a mix node. Shift A again, search for a color balance. And one setting I need to enable in my view layer properties, so that's this one here. I need for my passes, I need to go to light, and I need to turn on glossy and direct. So that's going to have this gloss direct node appear in my render layers. So with these 4 nodes in here now, and the light glossy direct turned on, we can now connect them all up and change some of the settings. So let's just move this across over here. I'm going to grab the RGB curves across, and I'm going to grab the gloss direct and plug that into the image. I'm going to bring the blur across and plug the image into the image of the blur node. Move my mix across. The image of the blur is going to go in here, and the image of the render layer is going to go into that top slot there. We're then going to feed this through a color balance, so the image into the image there. And finally, we just need to connect up the image of our final output to the composite and the viewer. Everything's going to go dark because we still need to change the settings of these nodes here. So for the mix node, instead of being a mix, we're going to switch this over to add. So drop down this mix here and then click on add. We're going to drop this factor down to about 0.3. What this is going to do is it's going to add the original image to the effects that we're going to apply down here. And the effect that we're going to want is we're going to blur the outside edges, which are shiny. So in the RGB curves, I'm going to add 2 points here. So one up there and then one down here, and I'm going to create a bit of an S-curve. And then for the blur node, I'm going to change it to fast Gaussian. Click on relative, and I'm just going to set it to the y-axis. And we're going to increase the y and x to 1 and 1. And we're going to decrease this size. We should be seeing an effect appear on our background image. If you're not, just press F12 to re-render it. We should see the effects come through now. We can close that, and we can see we've got this sort of shiny outside. And now when we make adjustments, we should see them appear in real time in the background there. So the size of this blur is going to be how far out we get this sort of shiny edge. And adjusting this curve in here, that's going to be on what areas of the render this sort of shininess is going to appear. So you can sort of cut out the darker areas or increase the lighter areas. Don't want it too much, want it fairly subtle. Now in color balance, we can mess around with our lift, gamma, and gain. So this is going to be our light areas, midtones, and shadows. So we can either adjust the bar in here, or we can adjust the color in the wheel here. So I might move that up there to create a darker tone for the shadow areas. For the gamma, maybe I'll sort of tint this a little bit of a bit of an orangey yellow. A little bit too much in there. And then I might bring the gain up to a bit of a bluey purpley sort of color. there. So this is with our effects applied. We just drag that across to the viewer node. That is without the effects applied. So now we've got to do our final render. We can go to our output properties in here. We can see we've got our format, so resolution XY 1920 by 1080 for our camera. We're going to leave that as is. We could up the resolution though, so instead of 100%, we could change this to 200%, so that's going to render it as a 4K image. And let's just press F12 to render it one more time. And this is our final rendered image. So to save our image, we can go image and just go save as. We can increase the compression to make it look nicer, so let's just bump that all the way up. And we can give it a name. And I'm fine saving it as a PNG with RGBA, so it's got an alpha for the background. And save. So we could just come back in here and we could make a few more renders. So if we wanted to make some renders without the helmet on, so if we select the helmet, hide it, and also untick the camera icon here, we could make some renders with our character's head in shot. We could zoom the camera out to make some full shots. We could zoom it in to do some close-ups. Make as many renders as you want to show off your work. That we are finished. At this point, you should have a completed character ready to be used in a game, whether you followed along with the tutorial character or you created your own design. Fundamentally, you should now have the skills to create game-ready characters or creatures. Of course, you can get into far more detail in each area of this series, from sculpting to rigging, but this should provide you with a good start in your journey. Thanks for watching this video and this video series. Please like and subscribe if you found them useful. You can check out our Patreon link in the description for a variety of rewards such as starting files and tutorial notes, and I'll see you in the next one.